back to school, it did. So you could kind of respond to that, or you could offer some questions that you still have or are still kind of working through. So I'm going to stop my share here, my screen share, so I can see the chat function. And you can just take a minute to respond, and as soon as you're ready, we're going to get everybody to put a little comment in there, and we'll use that as kind of our starting place this afternoon. All right, so does everybody know how to use the chat? You can unmute if you have questions about it. Great question, Peggy. Thank you. And since I took that other slide off of the screen, the 3 ways you can respond, one could be something that resonated with you, something that changed for you, or like Peggy offered, a question. Okay, we'll definitely talk about this then, this idea, this concern about feeling like we're judging people. Well, let's go ahead and start here. I know that there are a couple of you who still might be doing a little thinking, but Peggy, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and maybe just talk about this a little bit.
Sarah, there are 4 of us here working together.
Oh, I got it now.
Peggy's our typist.
Okay, I'm with you.
But we spent part of the day in classrooms and things and observing, but still we have questions. How do you start that conversation with what you saw without sounding like you're doing an evaluation?
Right, absolutely. So let me ask you a question about the context of the observation. So are you coaches or model teachers? Model teachers?
Model teachers.
Okay. And are you going into each other's classrooms first?
We have done some of that in the past, and now we're in other teachers' classrooms.
Okay. So one of the things that you might consider is you might consider practicing with each other first. So maybe if you started by kind of setting up a little bit of a rotation where, and even if you're not in a, there for more than, you might just be in there for 5 or 10 minutes, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a big, long experience because you're trying to practice. I think you might be able to try out a couple of things with each other and maybe try to hone some of those skills. So first of all, I think one of the things that can be important is whoever is being observed, if there's something that they are curious about, and then you are collecting evidence about what they're curious about, I think that can be really, really helpful. If you go in as a model teacher to somebody's classroom and you are looking for something specific, you're right, it's really hard to not come across as evaluative or to not come across as kind of administrator light, and so I think the framing of this becomes really important. And so maybe if you wanted to practice that with each other, or before you went into another teacher's classroom, just ask them, what are you curious about right now? What could I look for that would be helpful? So that your job then is not to tell them, everything that you saw. I mean, like, not tell them everything that you saw in terms of saying this was good or this was bad or this worked or this didn't work. You might just be able to kind of report to them some of the things that they weren't able to see. What do you think about that?
I like the idea of framing it with what are you curious about?
Yeah, and that's
what could be helpful.
Yeah, and that's how I framed it this morning with a teacher.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be well received, and
Good.
I just had said that I can just be another set of eyes for some things that maybe, you're wondering about.
Right.
So, and that seemed to go okay.
Yes. And then I guess my second question then, or follow-up was, did you consider inviting them into your classrooms first?
Time is an issue with that.
Okay.
As where we had the day with a sub in our room because we didn't know how long this would last today. It gave us a chance, because our rooms were covered, for us to get into other rooms. So
okay. Okay.
Inviting people in says, okay, take your special time and come into our rooms. That's kind of been where we've struggled a little bit with getting people into each other's rooms.
But
right.
I think our administrator would be supportive in covering classrooms for people to get into our rooms too. So that's just going to be a change in mindset for us a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, I would really consider thinking about flipping the model just a little bit, especially until people are comfortable. Because you don't want, I think it would be sad if you started to make this progress and then because people weren't completely comfortable, they you know what I mean? Like they maybe would just become a little bit more hesitant about it.
Yep. I think that would be a good start.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you raised the question, because I think that it's really, it is really important. And the word that you're going to probably hear me talk a lot about in the time that we're together this afternoon is kind of like wonder and curious. What are you wondering? What are you curious about? And being able to frame a lot of our questions in that way, I think can be helpful so that it doesn't come across as evaluative.
And there are always those teachers who are not very self-reflective.
Right.
So I guess that's something to work through too. If you say, what are you curious about? And they shrug their shoulders.
Yeah. And that might be another reason to kind of flip it around so that you're doing that work first, right? Or even if you're just doing it with each other to start off. Because then you could practice, Peggy, you could say, all right, I'll be model teacher today. And I'm going to figure out, how long does it take me to figure out what I'm curious about? Is this just like a few minutes before class starts? Or is it something I really needed to think about for a day ahead of time? And then you would know how that would feel for other teachers on staff. And then when when somebody comes in, you would kind of know how to ask, and then you could kind of talk about the way that you then received the feedback or how the feedback was helpful to you. So really what you're going to be doing then is you're going to be modeling this process of inviting people into the classroom and modeling the process of taking the feedback and being reflective about it. And that's because you're right. Some people are not naturally reflective and some people probably are, but if they haven't really seen other people be reflective, they might not even know what those first steps would be like. So you all get to model that too.
Okay. All right.
Doesn't that sound exciting?
Almost wish we had school tomorrow.
Yeah, but I do. I really think that that the process does become really important because the process is what's going to change culture. right? It's not just a phrase or a problem of practice or that some people went to a training. That's not going to really change the culture. So,
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. All right. And I feel really good about that conversation though. And I feel like it was actually really, really strongly tied to our work this afternoon. But I don't see any other posts in the comments. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the screen here and move us along a little bit. I think that my computer is really slow. There we go. So you kind of actually, Peggy, or somebody in your group, picked up on that word self-reflective. And I'm using the word metacognition. It's that meta word, the idea that we are, thinking about thinking. And so what we want to also be focusing on is what kind of language can we use to really foster that reflectiveness, or what language can we use to really foster this metacognition? The first thing that I would say is that it's not about the what, right? So we're not really going to talk so much about the tu-di-ta, right? Or the strategy itself or the steps of it. But instead, what we need to focus on is thinking about, why did we do this first thing? Why did we follow it up this way? How did I use it to connect to yesterday's learning? And so we want to kind of shift, I think, the sentence starters for us. We're so conditioned to talk about what we did instead of why we made this decision and how we connected it to learning, that using those two words, I think, can be a real important catalyst in this kind of talk. And even when I think about the example that we were just talking about, or this model that you might be able to use in your own school, if you think about trying to hold each other accountable, because you're all here together. So if you could hold each other accountable to those why and how words, that would be really great. So again, I'm just using Peggy's name because hers was the one that was on the screen. But let's say Peggy is that model teacher and she's going to say, okay, I'm curious about this today. And one of the colleagues comes in and is able to kind of say, this is what I saw. And maybe then the colleague says, so what do you think about that, Peggy? And instead of saying, well, this is what I did first and this is what I did second, Peggy would start by saying, well, this is why I made this decision. This is why I did this. This is how it connects to learning. And you could kind of, in a very friendly way, hold each other accountable for practicing the why and the how, okay? The next thing that I would say is that when we think transparently, there's a question that we're really asking ourselves. And the question we're really asking ourselves is, what do I need to discover about their learning? So the thinking has to precede the talking. Sometimes we just want to go right to the talking, but there has to be time to kind of process. And so as transparent teachers, what we are wondering is, what's going on with their learning? Not necessarily are they following directions, but if they are, how come? If they're not, what is it telling me about their learning, right? Or if they're engaged, what is that telling me about their learning, that kind of thing. So then when we talk transparently, what we're really saying is, what did I learn about my students today? So if we go back to the why and the how, you can kind of see, I think, the connection between why and how to what I learned about my students today. And so I think that's like I said, a way to kind of frame this. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for a second, give anybody a chance to jump in, to agree, disagree, push the conversation, ask a follow-up question. Great comment there. I find it difficult at times to get the authentic feedback from students. It is tough. I think that one of the ways you can try to get authentic feedback from kids is, first of all, by taking their names off of it. So maybe asking them to answer one quick question. What did you learn today? And not necessarily have their name on it, right? So it's certainly not about a grade. It's not about being right or wrong. But it's really just so that you get more information. And I don't know if that's, I don't know if you want to unmute and jump in a little bit on that.
It's more like I'll talk to my kids about, what do you want to learn about? What do we want to do? And I just feel like I have a hard time. It's all about, well, nothing, because they're junior high kids. So that's what they want to do is, so I guess, how do you get that buy-in with the kids?
Yep.
Where you're building things together?
Yep. Well, I do think this. I think in order for kids to know what they want to learn, they have to have a ton of background knowledge, right? And so sometimes what we overlook, and it's usually just because we feel so much pressure to get so much covered or done, is sometimes what we overlook is the background knowledge. So let's say, I suppose, so it depends kind of like on how cold of a question that is, cold just in terms of, is it, just kind of like the way you start a brand new unit, do they know anything about it? So if it's something like, I don't know, let's say it's something about geometry, and you ask that question, they probably are going to have a lot of background knowledge in order to ask a good question, in order to get curious about it. So you might want to think a little bit about, at least as you're working, as you're trying this kind of teaching, kind of the more project based is kind of what it sounds like to me, that you really focus on the background knowledge first, and then start to give them options, and then build them up to the point in which they're ready to offer that. I think that is a little bit different than what I was suggesting with asking the quick question about what they learned, but that might be another way to start to give them more autonomy or start to get them ready to answer this question. If you just ask them at the end of each day, maybe instead of what they want to learn, maybe you could start with what they did learn, and that would start to shift the conversation from wanting to what they did, right? But at least it would be about learning instead of the tasks. I don't know. Is that helpful or not?
Yes. No. And two, that's not always what school looks like. So you need to model for them even to have choice.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, I would even say, I do lots of projects in my courses, but very rarely at the beginning. So I always think of them as like these big waves, right? We would just have these big waves in the course. And it always every wave, even if it's, 2/3 of the way through the school year, every wave has to start with building background knowledge. So that's when we're reading a lot, we're writing, we are, getting content knowledge. So sometimes that's, if I'm going to give any direct instruction, that's a lot of times right where it is. And then and then I'm working to release them into these projects, right? But if I just release them and I can only say this because I've done it too many times, release them into the project at the beginning, and then they just look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense, because they get confused because they don't know what the expectation is. They don't know what it is you're wanting,
exactly.
What it is that they need to learn or what they want to do.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I would also just offer, one of the best ways that I've always figured out how to help them when they're struggling is try to do it myself. So rather than, so sometimes I'll give myself a break and I'll say, all right, tonight, instead of responding to papers, you're going to actually do this assignment, or you're going to, try to come up with your own idea. Even if I don't share that idea with them so that I don't feel like they're copying it, at least I'm paying attention to my process. And then I can maybe figure out what's difficult or what actually didn't make sense for me. And then I can maybe be more helpful with them. So that's a little added thing there. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna try this out. You all are gonna be my guinea pigs. And so I'm gonna need some really authentic feedback from you. But I just put a link here in the chat, which is to a series of work that I actually did just before I came to be with all of you. And I took some videos that I had done for Teaching Channel, and I did something called a teacher's cut, which is to try and talk metacognitively over top of the whole video. And so I am sharing the link with you for the shortest one. It happens to be about the pattern folder. And I chose this one, first of all, because it's the shortest one, and second of all, because you have a little bit of background knowledge, because I talked about those pattern folders a bit when we were together last month. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. I'm going to ask you to follow this link, to watch the video, and then especially listen for what you think might be examples of this transparent talk. I'm going to ask you to do 2 things: to go ahead and listen for the examples of transparent talk, but then I'm going to ask you to also think about if that helps you pay attention to your own practice or your own classroom. All right, so this is where I need the authentic feedback from all of you. So I'm modeling the model. All right. Okay, off you go for 5 minutes. I will mute my my mic and kind of let you know when we're getting close. All right.
Hey, Sarah, I'm going to have to step away. I say
pattern folders really highlights a strategy. It's the what.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I'm going to have to step away, okay?
You're fine. You're fine. Just leave the record on. We'll be good.
Sarah, we're not able to get it open.
Okay. Do you want me to try to share my screen? Let me just try to share my screen with it on. Should we do that and see if it comes through or not?
Yeah.
Okay. It's very awkward watching yourself.
Welcome to the Teacher's Cuts, a video series where we're working to take all of those invisible teacher moves, the things that go on in our brains as we're teaching, make them really visible to you. As you know, there's always more to the story when it comes to the lessons that we teach. So consider this to be one of those layers. It's kind of a layer of insiderness to these particular video lessons. As you're watching them, I hope it helps you think about the layers of your lessons and how those layers can help transform your teaching too. So let's talk about the difference between strategies and learning. This particular video on pattern folders really highlights a strategy. It's the what. But I want to use this commentary to really focus on the how, on how to use the pattern folder as a framework for all kinds of lessons and all kinds of content areas. So here is the backstory on the pattern folder, which is very similar to the backstory on most of the ideas that I end up having. My kids were struggling. They were struggling to trace connections or trace an idea throughout an entire text. And so I was like, oh my goodness, what can I do to help them figure this out? And so I wanted them to have some physical, tangible thing in front of them that was really mirroring what I wanted to be going on in their brains at the same time. So that's where the pattern folder came from. Like, you have this folder with all these pockets, and I'm thinking, this is like your brain, right? Your brain has all of these pockets, and we need to fill up these pockets in your brain with these different details as you read. So that's really where this pattern folder came from. And a lot of times when I talk to teachers about this, we talk about the strategy component of it, which is fine. And they, want to know what's the first step and the second step, which is all fantastic. But I also have to be honest with you and tell you that I rarely do this the same way twice. The one thing that stays consistent is that there are pockets and that students fill them up. But in addition to that, there really is a lot of flexibility in how I use it. So in this particular video, I'm talking about how we built on sticky notes that we had placed in our books. But some other time, it might not be Post-it notes. It might just be taking notes as we're reading on those note cards. And so there are just all these different ways to really conceive of this single strategy. I want to pay attention to how, though I'm talking to Tommy about it right here, you're really thinking about how it represents how you see society. And how you see society could very well be, are you representing normalcy? Are you representing equality? So what we're seeing Tommy do right here is the work that we as teachers so often do without realizing it. We can trace patterns, we can draw conclusions, but we do it so quickly because we're so well versed at it, and sometimes because we know the content so well that we forget how to slow down. So that's what's happening here. I'm figuring out how to teach the kids to slow down their thinking enough to become deliberate about creating a process around constructing meaning. So here are some things that are ultimately important about the pattern folder. They create flexibility. There's student choice involved. They get to pick what they want to trace and which patterns in our pockets they want to fill up and which ones they want to abandon. It helps students really focus on constructing their learning. What's not as important are the number of pockets or the number of note cards that are in there. And instead, what we really want to focus on is making sure that kids have an apparatus that mirrors their brains that helps them construct their own meaning.
All right. Did that work?
Yes, that worked.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I know there's a group of 4 of you right there, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to talk. Those of you who are on the call on your own, you can put a couple of things here in the chat if you want to. But I'm really curious about those 2 questions that I started with. One, did you hear transparent talk? And if you did, what did you hear? And then secondly, did it work for you or not? right, take about another minute or so, and then we'll either unmute and chat, or I can see that we're getting some comments there in the chat as well, so that's fantastic. I'm loving the comments that are showing up. Thank you for contributing, everybody. If anybody wants to unmute and just kind of share, since we have a nice small group here, you are more than welcome to do that.
I really like that it did talk about not worrying about the number of pockets and things like that. I feel like too many times people get caught up in what something is supposed to look like instead of what is the end result supposed to be.
Right.
And so it's all about, for each group, you might do an activity and it looks like one thing in period 1, and the same activity looks different for period 2 because they're different kids. That we can't just say, well, this works and it looks like this and this is what you do every day or every time.
Yep.
And I thought the video did an awesome job of really relaying that, of showing the thought process behind making sure that the needs of the students are what's the primary focus.
Good, because I'm really trying hard to practice what I'm teaching. So just a couple of things. And I want to also kind of give you a context for why else I wanted to share this with you. I think that I started with kind of a curiosity, right? So I really did have this problem of practice at the beginning, that I was curious. I noticed my kids were struggling and I didn't know what to do. And so I think that whenever we can talk to other teachers about what we're trying to accomplish in the context of what my students are struggling with, and this is how I'm trying to, this is how I'm trying to make sense of that. I think that it really takes us away from that evaluative standpoint, right? Because we're in the beginner's mindset, we're struggling, right along with everybody else. So I think that that is important. And then several of you kind of picked up on what I had hoped to do, which was talk less about the what and more about the how. And then I hope that you were able to see, and it looks like it from the comments, that when we talk about the how, it then becomes relevant to all kinds of teachers. Sometimes if we only talk about the what, then it's only relevant to the teachers who teach the grades we teach or the subjects we teach. Whereas the more we talk about the how, the more universal our insights can become to all teaching and learning. And so I think that part's really important. The other reason I wanted to share this with all of you is because I think it's a potential exercise, right? I think this is a potential exercise where you just grab 2 minutes of your own classroom, you video 2 minutes of it. Or if you're working with another model teacher, you ask them just to come in with the phone, grab 2 minutes. And then as you are working on these skills, you can try to narrate it, right? It doesn't have to be fancy. It's just a way of practicing. But I do know this, if we want to change the way that we talk about our teaching, we have to deliberately practice. And so this could be a way for you to think about doing that. I'll pause again before I kind of try to pull things together to see if anybody has pushback, questions, feedback on that. All right, so sounds like everybody's good, or the silence I'm going to assume means everybody's good. I'm going to take you to one last document here, and we will also put this document, can you all see that? Here, I'll try to make it a little bit larger here. There we go. It's a little bit bigger. We'll also put this just as a standalone document in the Google Classroom. You also actually have a link to it. Yesterday, we sent out the 5 Acts of Teaching Transparently work that we're going to invite you to do before May. And so this is also linked in there so you can take a closer look, because there's a lot of tiny font in here that I'm not going to read right now. But as I started to do my own model teacher work, I really kind of looked at these 6 components of a process of being a model teacher. And so I have them as week 1, week 2, but to be honest with you, I'll tell you that it really actually played out more like these 6 phases. And as soon as I got through the 6, I would kind of start over again. And sometimes week 1 was just a day, you know. But here they are. Week 1, or the first step, is really thinking about paying attention. And it's what you do actually even before you work on establishing that problem of practice. You just kind of have to pay attention to your kids. So that might mean doing some of that formative assessment. You might want to survey them, kind of informally interview some of them about what they're learning, or where they're struggling, or what makes sense to them, or what doesn't make sense to them. And then you'll also just know, right? You'll know what kinds of things aren't working. So then week 2, or phase 2, is thinking about some deliberate routines that would lead to teaching transparently. So that might mean you commit to, writing on a sticky note really, quickly before each day, I am curious about, or today I will wonder about. And it doesn't have to be a big, huge formal thing. It's just some little reminder that you want to pay attention to your classroom a little bit differently, okay? Then the 3rd week, or 3rd phase, is inviting other people in. So now you kind of have that problem of practice that's probably more established. And so you can invite in a coach, a mentor teacher, another model teacher, an administrator. But really what you want is you want them to help you collect information about your curiosity, about your problem of practice, and then have a conversation with them about that. And then I would really encourage you just to record the conversation. I just use my phone. It's nothing fancy. And I'm not going to share that conversation with anybody else, but I am going to listen to it. And I'm going to try to see if I am focusing more on what I did, or how and why that connected to learning. So it'll just be kind of my own formative assessment. Then week 4, step 4, phase 4, is working on talking more transparently. So this includes kind of listening to that recording if you did that, and then trying to kind of think about some phrases that you could use. And just, again, I even gave that example, early on about holding each other accountable to how and why. So that might be part of it. Week 5 is showing your work. So somehow it's taking a photo, it's, capturing a piece of student work, something that would be an artifact for what you have learned. And then finally, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to do this and move your faces. And then finally, the focus is on, using what works. And so in that sense, you want to be able to really focus in on the habits and the routines that worked for you, and then you want to replicate those. And so you want to become more deliberate. So if you discovered that you needed to have more wait time before you asked questions, then what you do at this point is you try to make that more of a habit. And then you can start the whole process over again. So I just, again, kind of offer that as a way for you to think about how this process might go. I didn't really share that document when we were together last month, and so I wanted to be able to share that today. Do you have any other questions? I promised you 3:45. It's 3:47. I'm going to chalk that up to technical difficulty. But the session is recorded, and so we will get that up on Google Classroom just as soon as we can. You have been wonderful. I think you asked really fantastic questions, and you offered some really great insights both in the chat and then verbally. So I know that other people are really going to benefit from the way that you were able to contribute this afternoon. So thank you so much. I'm going to let you go and get ready for the next one. And we will see each other. We will see each other at the end of May. All right. Okay. Bye, everybody.
How we doing?
We are good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you want to stop recording,
Okay.
and then we can start again on the next one.
Okay.
They had some really great, I thought some great